Welcome to the Invite Health Podcast. I am Dr. Amanda Williams, MD, MPH, and today we are going to be spicing things up. We are going to talk about the importance of adding spices to your foods as well as supplementing with different spices. There is so much research out there when it comes to the benefits of things like turmeric, ginger, rosemary, Cumin Extract. So I'm going to talk about all of those in terms of adding those spices to different recipes that you are using, as well as taking them when it comes to supplementation form. So all of that will be on tap for today. But before we get started, just a friendly reminder for you to subscribe to the Invite Health Podcast. You can leave us a review. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health. Remember that all of the information on today's episode will be linked in the episode description. And you can visit invitehealth.com/podcast for more information. So let's get right to it. The reason why I wanted to talk about this particular topic is just this week, there was a brand new study that came out of Penn State University talking about the importance of spices. And they said that adding a blend of spices to a meal may help lower inflammation. Well, we in the natural world have known this for a very long time. There's ample clinical research out there looking at these different spices, these different herbs, and how beneficial they can be for targeting different forms of systemic inflammation. Why that's important is that we know that every single chronic disease out there has an underlying common theme to it, and that is chronic low-grade inflammation. So oftentimes I refer to that as inflammaging, because the more inflammation that we have in the body, the harder it is for us to control certain disease states. When we're thinking about things like diabetes, when we look at things like obesity, which interestingly enough, this study out of Penn State, that's specifically what they were looking at. They were talking about how spices in a high saturated, high fat, high carb meal can reduce this postprandial pro-inflammatory cytokine secretion. So let's break all that down. What exactly does that mean? Postprandial, that means after you eat. What is actually happening? And they've been able to document that when someone is having a high saturated fat, high carb, not good carbs. We're not talking about carbs coming from your fruits and vegetables. We're talking about bad carbohydrates, things from breads and pastas, for example. They can document that just from doing blood testing and see that shortly after you eat a meal that is high in fat, saturated fat, and high in bad carbohydrates, you get this really rapid release of these pro-inflammatory cytokines. So these all start to get secreted. So we get this driving up of inflammation. Well, we know that this is a problem in so many different chronic disease states. We always want to try and keep our inflammation at a very, very low amount. Well, the way that we can achieve that, number one, is through foods. If we're not doing a high saturated fat, high carbohydrate diet, and we're adhering more to that Mediterranean diet, then we're going to get that balance. And we're going to be able to allow the body to take in those foods, get the proper nutrients, the vitamins and minerals from those foods, but at the same time help to control and regulate inflammation. So the study out of Penn State that was published in the Journal of Nutrition was looking at men who were overweight or obese, and then looking at their serum blood level markers for these different inflammatory cytokines. So in this, they really wanted to hone in on the issue that is occurring in the United States when it comes to those who are overweight or obese. And they said this affects nearly 72% of adults in the United States, and the prevalence of obesity has nearly tripled since 1962. We know this. We know that this chronic low-grade inflammation is that driving force for different metabolic diseases, such as diabetes, such as cardiovascular disease. We have to recognize that unhealthy dietary habits is a really main factor in why the state of our health is so poor. So what they wanted to basically do was set up a controlled study where if they gave these men who were not eating the right foods, if they actually just started to incorporate certain spices into their diet, what that would actually do in terms of these different markers for inflammation. They said the spices not only add flavor to the food, but they may also confer these various health benefits due to the presence of these bioactive compounds. So we look at different things. We look at things like turmeric, understanding that curcumin or curcumin, just depending upon who is saying it, how beneficial that can be. When we look at ginger extract, for example, understanding how powerful that ginger can be from offsetting a lot of the inflammation that occurs. So in this, they took a group of men between the ages of 40 and 65 years old who were overweight or obese. So they had elevated waist circumference, they had elevated lipid profile, meaning that their total cholesterol and their LDL levels were elevated. They had elevated C-reactive protein. Remember, C-reactive protein, that is looking for systemic inflammation in the body. So it's not cardiac specific necessarily, but it is looking for any low-grade levels of inflammation. They were looking at their blood pressure and they were looking at their fasting glucose. So they looked at all of these things. They looked to see if any of them had any underlying, health conditions such as diabetes, such as kidney disease, autoimmune conditions, and if they were taking any medications or supplements. So what they did is they enrolled these men who were just basically having really bad diets. And from this, they said, okay, let's try and test and see if we start to add in spices to their diet, if this would have any type of an impact on those inflammatory cytokines from being secreted. And indeed, that is what they were able to determine. So they were looking at things such as ginger, such as turmeric, such as cumin, rosemary extract. So those ones I really wanted to kind of hone in on, because we know that there is ample research out there on those specific spices alone when it comes to chronic disease states, when we're talking about things like irritable bowel disease, things like ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, when we look at diabetes, when we look at so many different cardiovascular conditions and how beneficial these spices can be if we just incorporate them in, not only to adding them to our foods, but when we are taking them in a really strong form as a supplement. So I want to talk about this in some detail. I'm going to talk about those specific spices. We're going to talk about cumin. We're going to talk about ginger. We're going to talk about rosemary as well as turmeric. So we're going to take a quick break. When we get back, I'm going to break down those different spices and tell you why it's beneficial to add them to your foods, but also add them to your supplementation routine. We will be right back.
This podcast is brought to you by InviteHealth.com. For over 20 years, Invite Health has provided premium quality supplements and expert advice you can trust. Now, first-time customers can enjoy an exclusive offer. Visit InviteHealth.com/podcast or click the link in this episode description. That's InviteHealth.com/podcast for your exclusive offer on Invite Health products. Invite Health offers the resources you need to make important decisions about your health. Chat live with degreed healthcare professionals, get product information, and find retail locations near you at invitehealth.com. You can also learn about our new genetic testing program and our exclusive Invite Fitness Wellness program. Follow Invite Health on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and be sure to subscribe to our podcast today. Now back to our episode.
And welcome back. Let's talk a little bit more about this study that was published in the Journal of Nutrition out of Penn State University, talking about those anti-inflammatory effects of spices, those bioactive compounds that are found within those spices. These are very well documented in both preclinical and clinical studies. Turmeric is the most commonly used spice in the world. And we know that curcumin is that main bioactive compound that is found within the turmeric. We know that this can alleviate oxidative stress. So when we talk about these spices, we're not only looking at how they target inflammation in the body. We also recognize that these spices come loaded with these powerful antioxidants that can help to fend off oxidative stress. So this is why so much research has gone into all of these different spices, but curcumin in particular. We recognize that this can help to reduce serum inflammatory cytokine concentrations in adults who have not only metabolic syndrome, but also people who are obese. So this is a very, very good thing. In this study, they demonstrated the impact of a high-fat, high-carbohydrate meal, what that was actually doing in terms of all of those markers for inflammation, looking at things like interleukin 8, looking at tumor necrosis factor alpha, how those levels went up after having a meal like that, and also recognizing that when they added in 6 grams of this spice blend, having things like ginger and turmeric, rosemary, Cumin Extract, how they saw those levels, those markers for inflammation going down significantly. So they were able to make this reduction in postprandial inflammation just by adding in these spices, which is really very impressive. But once again, this is something that we definitely have known about for a very long time in the natural world. In the International Journal of Preventive Medicine, they were talking about the antioxidant as well as anti-inflammatory effects of ginger in health as well as in physical activity. Understanding that ginger, once again, not only is going to be geared at targeting inflammation, but also helping to fend off free radicals and oxidative stress. We know that ginger has been around for a very long time. Many people know that ginger can be beneficial when it comes to GI health. If someone is experiencing issues with indigestion or heartburn, certainly having a little bit of raw ginger into your diet can be very helpful, very beneficial. There's some folks out there who even have issues with constipation. They have found that ginger can be beneficial. We know that ginger, being that it also is targeting that inflammation, there are studies looking at ginger and arthritis as well. So we know that the phytochemistry of ginger has all of these different compounds or these components in it that help to scavenge those free radicals. This is a very good thing. The more antioxidants we have in our system, the better off we can do to help to support our endogenous antioxidants, things like glutathione, for example. So if we're having ginger into our diet, this helps to work in conjunction with glutathione, along with things like coenzyme Q10. These are all naturally occurring antioxidants. And if the body is under extensive oxidative stress, we can start to diminish or wear away a lot of those naturally occurring antioxidants, which is why we want to incorporate these into our diet. So not only food-based, so having ginger as a spice in our foods, but also when we look at supplementation. So we have a really lovely turmeric and ginger combination. These are capsules, so it's giving you a high amount of turmeric extract along with ginger root extract. And this is important because recognizing the amount of research that's out there, seeing the way that the gingerol, that's one of the main compounds in ginger, can be beneficial when it comes to impeding inflammation. We know that the gingerol contained within ginger can inhibit the synthesis of pro-inflammatory cytokines, things such as interleukin 1, things such as tumor necrosis factor alpha and interleukin 8. These are all very beneficial to try and regulate. If we have excess TNF alpha, we're going to have a lot of inflammation that is occurring, which is not a good thing. We don't want that to happen. And we know that if we can have things such as ginger, such as turmeric extract, to basically disrupt that inflammatory cytokine release, then it makes a lot of sense that we would want to have these in our diet. We look at those different pathways, that COX-1, COX-2 pathway, for example. So that's the cyclooxygenase pathways. If we can impede the inflammatory cytokines that are released within those pathways, then that's a very, very good thing. Now, when we look at these different spices, we also recognize that they've been studied outside of the box besides that of just their antioxidant properties. We have also seen these different spices that have been studied even in the setting of certain cancers. And part of the reason why is because we are looking at the antioxidant benefit of those, but also when we look at the disruption of things like NF-kappa beta. So NF-kappa beta is a major driver for inflammation in the body, especially in the setting of cancer. So I'm not going to get too detailed in that, but if we can have these spices and we are targeting inflammation, we are targeting oxidative stress, we are helping to support a healthy blood glucose response. I mean, when you look at the anti-diabetic effects of something such as ginger, as this particular study highlights, talking about how ginger can significantly lower blood glucose and help to support a healthy serum total cholesterol, meaning helping to support healthy LDL levels, helping to support healthy triglyceride levels. This is all very, very beneficial. And study after study continue to show the role of ginger when it comes to inflammation, when it comes to targeting elevations in blood glucose, which is why all of this is really important for you to be able to understand and walk away with it and say, okay, yeah, maybe I do need to start to incorporate spices into my recipes on a regular basis. Maybe I need to stop doing all of those high processed foods and the high fat foods and the bad carbohydrates and really start to incorporate these types of nutrients into not only your foods, but also into your supplements. So we're going to take another quick break. When we get back, I'm going to talk a little bit more about chronic diseases, inflammation, and spices and how they are all linked. I'm going to refer to a study that was published in the Journal of Translational Medicine that really kind of hones in on all of that. So we will be right back.
This podcast is brought to you by InviteHealth.com. For over 20 years, Invite Health has provided premium quality supplements and expert advice you can trust. Now, first-time customers can enjoy an exclusive offer. Visit InviteHealth.com/podcast or click the link in this episode description. That's InviteHealth.com/podcast for your exclusive offer on Invite Health products. Invite Health offers the resources you need to make important decisions about your health. Chat live with degreed healthcare professionals, get product information, and find retail locations near you at invitehealth.com. You can also learn about our new genetic testing program and our exclusive Invite Fitness Wellness program. Follow Invite Health on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and be sure to subscribe to our podcast today. Now back to our episode.
And welcome back. So let's talk about the study that came out of the Journal of Translational Medicine talking about chronic diseases. And we look at all the different chronic disease states that are out there. We can look at cardiovascular disease, we can look at arthritis, we can look at diabetes, Alzheimer's disease. We certainly recognize that when it comes to chronic disease states, this is a major problem here in the United States. And we know that chronic diseases all have a common backbone to them, and that is inflammation. Now, inflammation in and of itself technically means to set on fire. It's the body's natural response against harmful pathogens and stimuli. Now, acute inflammation is one thing. That's part of our innate immune system. We want that to occur. That's if we have an acute injury or an attack by a pathogen. We want to have a inflammatory response to that. Chronic inflammation, that's a whole different category, and this is where all of the problems occurs when we have this low-grade chronic inflammation. And you can see this across the spectrum when you look at prostatitis, when you look at hepatitis, when we look at cancers, for example. We know that the activation of certain things like NF-kappa beta, that master regulator for chronic inflammation in the body, is the main issue. Now, if we can target these pathways with different spices, it would be very smart for us to do. There are epidemiological studies that indicate that countries where spices are consumed on a daily basis, their likelihood or the prevalence of cancer is much, much lower than in countries such as the United States, where the incorporation of spices into our foods is not that high. Americans like salt, Americans like sugar. But when it comes to actual spices, things like turmeric, things like ginger, things like cumin extract, not so much. And it is a really statistically significant difference when you look at cancer rates in India versus cancer rates here in the United States. And so you have to look at, where is the main difference? And what it comes down to the inflammation. We know that chronic low-grade inflammation is that driving forest fire in the body that creates so much long-term damage. So Advanced Biomedical Research Journal talked about the role of curcumin when it comes to disease prevention and treatment. And this is probably one of the most widely studied spices that is out there. And looking at the different mechanism of action of how curcumin is working when it comes to managing different disease states. Well, we know a lot of it comes down to the antioxidant aspect. So being able to effectively go through and scavenge free radicals or these reactive oxidant species that can create damage at a cellular level. So once we start to screw up one set of cells, we're going to start to affect many different cells as well as systems and pathways. Never a good thing. We also know that curcumin has this role in terms of anti-inflammatory properties via inhibition of enzymes such as the cyclooxygenase 1 and 2 pathways, as well as the 5-lipoxygenase pathway. So we look at these different ways in which inflammatory cytokines are released in the body, and we know that when we have higher amounts of curcumin running through the bloodstream, that we have a better opportunity for regulating that inflammatory storm that basically occurs. We know that curcumin, once again, has been looked at in terms of targeting blood glucose and having a healthier blood glucose response. So even in the setting of diabetes, for example, not only within pancreatic aspects of blood glucose and insulin response, but also when we look at the long-term negative implications of glycation that can occur because of unregulated blood sugar. Glycation starts to do damage throughout every single system in the body, including when we think about diabetic retinopathy, for example, damage done to the eye because of glycation. So much research out there when we think about your different spices and curcumin in particular. There is so much research on curcumin, really very impressive. Also, when you think about easing inflammation when it comes to joint health, this is one area that sometimes gets overlooked, is the role of curcumin when it comes to managing so many different disease states. When it comes to GI health, for example, there is a really nice chart that they put into this particular study that I'm referring to here out of the Advanced Biomedical Research Journal, talking about the way in which curcumin itself shows its role as an anti-inflammatory, targeting cyclooxygenase, targeting tumor necrosis factor alpha, targeting NF-kappa beta, interleukin, lipoxygenase, I had mentioned that one. And these different interferons, we also see that as well. We also look at all of the different clinical research trials on curcumin. So in terms of its antioxidant properties, in terms of anti-inflammatory, in terms of cardioprotective benefits, in terms of neuroprotective benefits, so for brain health, for gastroprotective benefits, hepatoprotective, so for our liver, for example, we look at antimicrobial properties. All of these different ways in which curcumin has been studied extensively and shown time and time again to be able to produce these really pronounced health benefits for all of these different wide scope of human health conditions that can lead to significant and long-term health problems for us. So interestingly enough, we have curcumin in a few of our different formulations. I had mentioned that we have our turmeric with ginger formulation, but we also have our biocurcumin 5-loxin formulation, which is biocurcumin combined with boswellia extract, which is Indian frankincense. Also been shown to be very targeted towards that COX-1, COX-2, and 5-LOX pathways. So many different ways for you to have these spices as part of your diet, but also to be taking them in terms of supplementation. So I want to talk about one more, and that is rosemary extract. But what I think I'll do is I'll take a quick little break. When we get back, I'm going to talk about rosemary extract and why this is a wonderful spice for so many aspects of our health. We will be right back.
This podcast is brought to you by InviteHealth.com. For over 20 years, Invite Health has provided premium quality supplements and expert advice you can trust. Now, first-time customers can enjoy an exclusive offer. Visit InviteHealth.com/podcast or click the link in this episode description. That's InviteHealth.com/podcast for your exclusive offer on Invite Health products. Invite Health offers the resources you need to make important decisions about your health. Chat live with degreed healthcare professionals, get product information, and find retail locations near you at InviteHealth.com. You can also learn about our new genetic testing program and our exclusive Invite Fitness Wellness program. Follow Invite Health on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and be sure to subscribe to our podcast today. Now back to our episode.
And welcome back. So, talking about spices today, why we should want to incorporate spices into our diet, as well as why we would want to be taking higher potency spices when it comes to supplementation. So it all kind of started with this study that just came out of Penn State University, and the researchers there at Penn State were looking at utilizing things such as cumin, ginger. They were looking at oregano, parsley extract, rosemary, and turmeric. And this was all published in the Journal of Nutrition, showing that different spices like ginger and turmeric have these very strong anti-inflammatory properties. But we also can look at rosemary, and this has rosmarinic acid and some other really powerful active constituents. And we know that rosemary is this medicinal plant that has been native to the Mediterranean region and utilized for a very long time for a whole slew of different human health conditions. So in the Journal of Biomedical Sciences, they were looking at rosemary extract as a therapeutic and prophylactic agent for all of these different potential health issues. Now, you have these different essential oils that come from the rosemary itself. So you have the rosmarinic acid, you have chlorogenic acid that's also found in coffee. Chlorogenic acid, very, very beneficial when it helping to regulate blood glucose levels. So oftentimes when people have high amounts of chlorogenic acid, maybe they're deriving that from coffee, that this helps to regulate a better blood glucose response, helps to enhance insulin sensitivity. But we know with rosemary extract that you have all of these different powerful constituents that are contained. So you have these phytocompounds that are within the rosemary itself. Now, each one of those different phytocompounds have been shown in a variety of different clinical research to have an abundance of health benefits. So when we look at the things like chlorogenic acid, looking at it being very beneficial, not only in terms of its antioxidant properties, but also in terms of having antimicrobial properties. Looking at that rosmarinic acid having very powerful neuroprotective properties, even being beneficial when it comes to helping mood. So for those who have higher anxiety, oftentimes they'll find that when they have high amounts of rosemary in their diet, they do much better. So all of these compounds, these phytochemicals that are contained within something that comes from nature, really can be quite beneficial. When you look at the way in which rosemary extract has been studied, it goes across the spectrum. We look at cardiac health and recognizing that the rosmarinic acid and these other compounds within rosemary can be very targeted towards the inflammatory response that can be damaging within the heart muscles themselves. So we're looking at things like tumor necrosis factor alpha in this particular setting. Understanding that TNF alpha can be really a problem if we have excess TNF alpha. So all of these different nutrients are things that can even be found in our black seed with rosemary formulations. We have this excellent formula that contains cumin extract, that's black seed. So black seed goes by a couple of different names. It's black cumin seed extract, also known as Nigella sativa. Some people just refer to it as cumin. So whatever floats your boat when it comes to that. But we understand that when we're looking at cumin extract, this once again, very powerful in terms of its ability to target and regulate inflammation and allow the body to have a much healthier inflammatory response. So we can kind of go back to that study where they talked about the prevalence of cancer in places such as India versus the United States. We know that things such as cumin extract very high in terms of daily intake in places such as India. So in the Journal of Evidence-Based Complementary and Alternative Medicine, they talked about that. They talked about the anti-inflammatory effects of cumin extract and how it's blocking all of these main signaling pathways that drive up inflammation. So they're looking at the cyclooxygenase pathway. They're looking at NF-kappa beta. All of these things that we know. Now, we happen to have this wonderful formulation called black seed with rosemary. It also has cordyceps mushroom in it, so that's just an added bonus. I have a lot of folks who will utilize this for a variety of different health concerns that they may have. Just to support a healthy immune response is one reason, but also for those who have problems with seasonal effects of pollens, for example. If we can target and help to regulate a healthier inflammatory response and help to regulate a healthier histamine response, which is one thing that we know rosemary extract is very good at doing, then we are kind of on that right path. So I just wanted to make you familiar with some of our formulations, be able to tie that in to the many different clinical research trials out there, and why this all kind of falls back to the original research that I spoke about today, coming from Penn State University, about how spices can be very helpful when it comes to our health, when it comes to regulating inflammation. Obviously, we know that you are what you eat, and if you are eating a high-fat, high-carb diet, that's not a good thing. You're going to be walking around in a state of high inflammation. We always want to do our best to ease inflammation in the body, and the first place that starts with is with your foods. So if you adhere to that Mediterranean diet, you're already on that right path. Just think, the Mediterranean diet is incorporating so many of these spices that we know from scientific research and have been clinically validated to provide so many different systemic health benefits. So do keep that in mind. Check out our turmeric and ginger formulation. Check out our black seed with rosemary and cordyceps formulation, as well as our biocurcumin and 5-loxin formulation. So that is all that I have for you today. I want to thank you for tuning in to the Invite Health podcast. Remember, you can find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to podcasts or by visiting invitehealth.com/podcast. Make sure that you subscribe, leave us a review. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health, and we will see you next time for another episode of the Invite Health podcast.